list method listing attributes of events not used to build the cohort. Tutorial 23. For those interested in getting deeper insights in cohort building and the use of cohorts in the evaluation of accountable healthcare, please read Riddles in Accountable Healthcare by Eran Bellin, available in Amazon as a paperback or in Kindle. Our goal is to use a list method to produce a single spreadsheet with attributes from 3 events. We're going to look at patients who were hospitalized for pneumonia, and we're going to look for attributes of that hospitalization, as well as attributes of other events that we're going to relate to that hospitalization. Those events that we're going to relate to the hospitalization were not used to build the original cohort. So we will look at 3 events, the cohort event itself, and 2 other events, and all of them will have attributes that we will realize in a single spreadsheet. What are the attributes from the cohort event that we're going to look for? We're going to look for disposition. Remember, these are all hospitalizations for pneumonia patients. We want to know whether the patient was discharged to home, or to the nursing home, or to some other facility. We're going to want to know the APR-DRG of the original pneumonia admission. Both of these attributes are attributes of the original cohort, of the original pneumonia hospitalization. We're now going to look for an additional event. That additional event is going to be the white blood cell count of the patient during the hospitalization. In fact, we want to have the first white blood cell count during this hospitalization. When we built the cohort, there was no requirement of a white blood cell count. We happen to know that every patient admitted for pneumonia will have a white blood cell count, but it wasn't a requirement. Now we're saying we want to find the white blood cell count, and when do we want that white blood cell count? We want it during the hospitalization, and which one do we want? We want the earliest one. This requirement is going to have us use the when-in temporal operator. And as a result, the simple method we used before will not be possible. This is an attribute that was not used to build a cohort. It's going to be the when-in. And the last event that we're going to look for, the last of the 3, is a cardiac echo. We want to know what the cardiac echo ejection fraction was in the last cardiac echo performed in the 0 to 180 days before this admission. So again, 3 elements we're going to need. We're going to need to be able to look at attributes of the admission itself, that's of the cohort itself. We're going to have to look for white blood cell counts that occurred during the admission but were not used to build the cohort. And we are going to look for an ejection fraction from a cardiac echo done before the admission itself. And all these variables and their values will be available to us in a single spreadsheet. That's our goal. First, we are going to go to Event Canvas, because as you may recall, we built pneumonia patients, but we built them with an index event line pointing to discharge. In fact, as part of the exercise, I had you build the male admissions and male discharges, so you would see the differences in the number of patients that index line focus on admission would give and index line focus on discharge would give. And I had you build the same for females to show you that small difference, because not all the admissions that happened in 2010 were discharged in 2010. Not all the discharges in 2010 were admitted in 2010. Some of you built only discharges. But this list method that we're about to use is asking for 3 elements: the cohort itself, the first white count during the hospitalization. So far, it's okay to have a discharge as representative of the hospitalization. But the last requirement was we needed to make sure there was a cardiac echo in 0 to 180 days before the admission date. And if you have a patient population based on discharges, you can't anchor on the admit date because your index date for the discharges are discharge date. Now you might say the simple solution is just build it on admissions. Just rebuild everything on admissions and find the cardiac echo value before that new cohort. The problem is that admissions and discharges do not get the same results. There's slight differences over time. So the question is, how do you instruct Looking Glass? I want the same patients identified from the discharge cohort, but instead of the discharge date as date of index, I want you to use the date of admission for each of those discharges as the index date. Looking Glass has a powerful tool that lets you build a cohort on the discharge index date, but represent the result of that rule, of the result of that condition, using the index date, date of admission. And I'll show you how to do that now. So let's open up the 2010 mail discharges. We're going to edit it. And we're going to save as so we don't forget. And I'm going to type next to the title ADM for admission. So that means I'm focusing on the admission. I also am going to describe what I'm doing here. I have this nice description part. So I'm saying cohort built on discharges, but used as endpoint for index date, the date of admission. As you know, a hospitalization, which can either be represented as an admission or a discharge, is a durational event. It therefore has a start date and an end date. And Looking Glass lets you represent the outcome of the selection by one of those two endpoints. Let me show you how. Let's open up the condition line, right-click, edit, pneumonia. I'm going to rename this pneumonia ADM. And I'm going to modify this. Modify event definition. You have discharge, inpatient discharge, and here are all the rules. ICD-9, pneumonia primary, and not disposition equal expired. And here's inpatient discharge. But here's something very interesting. Endpoint event. Endpoint event says, I recognize that this event has two endpoints, a start and an end, an inpatient discharge and an inpatient admission. And what I want you to do is I want you to select on the inpatient discharges that meet the criteria. But when you represent this condition line in the event canvas, I want you to use the inpatient admission endpoint. So it's very quick, very easy. Update and close. And now you just build it. And what you will now get is exactly the same cohort, in the exact same order, with the exact same number of patients, 753. And if you look back, you'll see it was 753 before. But now, the index date that is being represented in this line is the index date of the admission rather than the discharge. So these patients were selected as having a discharge in 2010. But when the cohort is being represented to the outside world, the index date that's being used is the index date of admission. Notice we misspelled this, so we'll have to correct this. And now I want to do it for the females. Well, I can modify the females directly, or I can just do it here. So I made all those other corrections already. It's easier just to modify here. Remember to save as, change it to females, here, left click, edit, and now instead of males, we're going to have modify the demographic definitions. We'll call it female. We'll right click here, we'll edit it, and instead of equals to male, it'll be equal to female. Update and close, update and close. Notice female has populated. Update and close. Now we have filled. And we have 927 females, the same number we had when we looked at the discharges and considered the discharge date as the index. Here, of course, we have the admit date as the index. So now we have our cohorts again. Now we're ready to go to Study Designer. We're going to rename this pneumonia, discharges, ADM. We're going to choose from our cohorts. Males ADM. I'm going to choose here again. Females ADM. I'm going to call these males. These females. Now I'm going to go to my method section. I'm going to add. Method type is going to be a list method. And it's going to be, call it complex. And what you see is demographics have already been selected as before, a whole bunch of demographics. I'm going to get rid of the whole bunch of them. Left click on apartment, then go all the way down to patient phone number, shift, left click, hit the red arrow, hit the red X, get rid of social security number present, event date time. Again, clicking the X to get rid of things. And now if I just ran it this way, I would just get these values on the original cohort. Just the demographics. I have the disposition. I also want to get the APR-DRG. So demographics I brought over in the list populated from the available attributes to the selected attributes. I need to look for the APR-DRG, which is another value that is in common between the two cohorts. Because the two cohorts are of the same type, have the same event type, I don't have to go under each individual cohort and pull something. I can just pull it from the what's called the common attribute. And here's APR-DRG code. I'll bring it over. Now disposition, inpatient, APR-DRG, and I could just run that, just as I did last time. And I'd just be describing the original hospitalization. But I want to get 2 additional pieces of information. If I only wanted 1 additional information, if all I wanted to get was the echo in the preceding period of time, I could have used a simple method. These additional events and their attributes are called outcome events and attributes. Here they're none yet because I haven't selected them. If I had only 1 outcome event, let's say I wanted to have the outcome event is cardiac echo, I could have used this paradigm, the racetrack paradigm. I could have gone backwards, started at the index state, which is the admission, go back in time to the earliest or first in the backward direction cardiac echo, and asked for that echo value. But in this case, I want 2, and so if I want more than 1, I have to go to the advanced method. Also, the white count is not anchored at the admission date with a within temporal operator. The white count is anchored by a when in operator. The white count uses a when in operator to point to the duration of the hospitalization. The simple method can't deal with that either. We therefore have to go to the advanced method. Notice we have the analysis definition, mega flag. We hit the 3-dotted button, and we now have to build our analysis definitions. We're going to call the first one white WBC count when in cohort duration earliest. First. Because the first white count during the hospitalization. When in, I can't see it in the bottom of my screen. I double click on the blue. I double click again. And now I see it when I roll down. So I'm going to have to say WBC count. I want the first or the earliest. New event definition. New event definition is going to be a WBC count. I'm going to select the laboratory test. I'm going to add a condition. The condition is going to be lab test type. It's going to be equal to, I have my drop-down menu, left click on the arrow, WBC. Update and close. The definition is defined. I'm going to update and close, and what this will then do is it will populate here. Now I have to define my duration definition. If I use this duration definition, I'll be looking at a calendaric window. I'm not interested in setting a calendaric window. If I choose select system duration, I'm looking on the analysis definition canvas itself. I don't have anything there. I'm pointing to the cohort. I'm pointing outside the analysis definition. I'm saying I want the white count in the cohort. So that's what I'm choosing. Update and close. It's now populated. I want to change the index line. I want to edit it. I want to make it earliest. Somewhat redundant, but I want complete control over this. White blood cell count, update and close. And now you see I have the earliest white blood cell count when in the cohort. New analysis, save and exit. There it is, white blood cell count when in cohort duration. Let's add a new one. Let's build a second one. Hovering over user analysis, left click, gets me new, then hover over the new, left click. Another analysis definition opportunity opens up, and now I'm going to make my cardiac echo, EF. Cardiac echo, ejection fraction, 180 day before. It's going to be a within condition. Because we're looking backwards in time, we want the latest one in calendaric time. The latest one is the most proximal one to the hospital admission. So if you have a number of echoes in time 0, the last one in the series prior to the hospitalization is the most proximal one. We want the latest cardiac echo, new event definition. We're going to call it echo EF, which is ejection fraction. We'll select echo date, definition, add condition. And I could say what I want here, which is the best value, and just limit it to that. Or, in this case, I just want to make sure there's an echo. I'll pull the value later, which is what I'll do. I'll delete this. So I have an echo, and all its attributes are going to come, and I'll decide later which attribute I want. If I'm absolutely sure I only want one attribute, I could select just on that attribute, but I'm not going to. Update and close. Latest echo, and we want it 0 to 180 days before the cohort collection. So once again, the AD is reaching outside of its canvas. It's saying, I want to get the echo 180 days, 0 to 180 days before the hospital admission. And I want to get, if there are many of them, I want the last one in the series. I want the one that's closest to the hospitalization. Once again, I hover over the index line. I'm going to edit it, and I'm going to want to make it latest of cardiac event echo. Update and close, and look over here to see where it's showing up. There it is, in the management pane. We now can leave the management pane, and we are now ready to ask the list method to give us permission to pull attributes from these new ADs. So far we don't have any outcome attributes available. You can see the group attributes from the original cohort. You can see the demographic attributes from the original cohort. We've selected some from the group, from the Gs, the APR-DRG, the disposition code. We've selected some demographics, but we want to get some outcomes here. So we're going to first choose our white blood cell count. Okay, this is during the hospitalization. Look what happens when I left click on that. All of a sudden, the outcome gets filled, gets populated with all sorts of attributes. If I want to see the attributes more easily, I can go up and down with the slider bar, or I can go to List Populators Maximizer. Remember, this whole area is we're calling below this line, this imaginary line, we're calling the list populator. We can maximize it by left-clicking on this point. Here are all the different values. And what I want to get is I want to get the lab test value. Okay, I already have the lab test type. It's a white blood cell count, lab test value. There are other values. Sometimes they're categoric values when you have a syphilis test or strep test. You have the test MD, the test clinic. Sometimes you actually have text itself, text associated with it, but not in this case. All we want is the lab test value. Let's minimize it again. And now we want to get the echo. Now notice the direction here. The direction doesn't say, it doesn't tell you what the direction is. It's all being controlled by the AD itself. But we know that cardiac echo is supposed to be before. It should be in the backward direction. Let's see what happens when we add cardiac echo. Before we do that, let me sort of minimize all the different variables here so you'll see it much better. Okay, so we just have the white count here. Now I'm going to choose the cardiac echo. And notice how the image shifts in the backward direction. That's because the cardiac echo happened before. We want to get the best value. That is, this is the best information we have about cardiac echoes. And I just bring that over. So now you can see I have the best value from the cardiac echo. I have the lab test value from the white count. I have the demographics from the demographic tab, the Ds. And I have from the group, the Gs, the disposition and the APR-DRG. So I've gotten everything I wanted. Keep in mind that each of these attributes are what we call a singleton attribute. As we didn't ask for all, we asked for earliest. We asked for one value. Each attribute is represented only once. So we only have one column for each of these attributes. This is very important. If you ever use all, that's too many. You'll create a column for every one value that you see. And that can be huge. If one person has 100 white counts, you'll have 100 columns. And everyone else will have 100 columns. And it will basically slow down your system completely. We'll get into that later, what you do when you want more than a singleton later. But when you have a singleton, it's very clean, it's very easy to work with. It's called the wide view for the singleton, and we will now run it. So now we're ready to run it. So now we have a spreadsheet that has the disposition, ICD-9 diagnosis, APR-DRG from the cohort itself. We have the white blood count. We have the white blood cell count, the first one during the hospitalization. And we have the cardiac echo ejection fraction result prior to the hospitalization. I can't show you the whole spreadsheet because it has dates and times in it which are considered somewhat identifiers in a limited data set. It has to be treated carefully. As before, you can export. You can export into Excel 2007, export it, data file, open, allow, and now you will have a spreadsheet and now you have a spreadsheet where the cohorts are fully defined, the males, females, the analysis definition. It says number of records because analysis definitions, analysis definition. You see the number of records is 0 because the analysis definition doesn't have any records. It tells you what the analysis definition was. Here's the cardiac echo, and then the data. And the data I've eliminated the identifiers from the data set. You have the SES, preferred language, the race, the age and index date, the disposition, APR-DRG code, was it present on admission, diagnosis type, the ICD-9-DX, the white count during the hospitalization, the first one, and here's a cardiac echo. You notice a large number of people don't have cardiac echoes. They still have a row. They have a row because the cohort member was there, but they have no value because they never had a cardiac echo. As you would have expected, everyone who was hospitalized had a white count if you're hospitalized for pneumonia. Not everyone who was hospitalized had a cardiac echo before this hospitalization. So you've now built a complex, advanced list method looking at 3 events and their attributes, 1 event that is the index event, and 2 events that were associated with the index event. Tremendously powerful tool.